Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for the statement and for advance sight of it this morning? Can I also take this opportunity to thank colleagues who have campaigned to help uncover the truth about the tragic events of 1984. In particular, on this side of the House, may I pay tribute to my colleagues, the Right Honourable Member for Wolverhampton South East, the Right Honourable Member for Worley, the Honourable Member for West Bromwich East, and the Honourable Member for Wolverhampton North East. They have done important work on behalf of many of their own constituents, and today I think it is only right that as a House we offer our collective thanks for their determined efforts. The 1984 raid on the Golden Temple complex, as the Foreign Secretary made clear, codenamed Operation Blue Star, resulted in hundreds of deaths, devastating damage to the temple itself, and rising levels of sectarian violence, which also ultimately saw the assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi later that year. So I welcome what light the report sheds on the British government's alleged involvement with these events and the fact that some of the key documents relating to this event and the British government's alleged involvement have now been published. But, Mr. Speaker, serious questions continue to be asked about the involvement, conduct and contribution of the British authorities at the time, going up to the highest level in the events that surrounded the storming of the Golden Temple and that ultimately cost so many innocent lives. In light of that, I would like to ask the Foreign Secretary the following questions. Firstly, I regret that the government has so far refused to accept our call that all relevant documentation relating to this incident that can be should now be made public. I welcome the publication of 5 further documents as part of today's report, but given that the report itself cites officials interviewed over the course of this investigation, will the Foreign Secretary now commit to publishing a list of those officials, and can he confirm whether any surviving ministers serving at the time were indeed interviewed as part of this investigation? Will he also confirm whether these testimonies will be made public? Secondly, on the terms of this investigation led by the Cabinet Secretary, I welcome the fact that following representations by the Sikh community, the Cabinet Secretary published a letter detailing the scope of his inquiry. But can the Foreign Secretary explain to the House why there was more than a 3-week delay in publishing these terms of reference? Can he further explain whether the terms of the inquiry changed over the course of the inquiry itself taking place? The terms of reference, as published in a letter from the Cabinet Secretary on the 1st of February, did not include specific reference to the time period covered by the investigation. Yet the final report sets out a time frame of December 1983 to June 1984. So can the Foreign Secretary explain why this time frame was not made public at an earlier stage? Many have already expressed regret that the investigation seemed to be covering only the first part of 1984, given the significance of events in the weeks and months after June 1984 and their direct link to the storming of the Golden Temple. So will the government now task the Cabinet Secretary to set out whether he believes there could be grounds for a fuller inquiry covering that longer period? Turning to the substance of the findings of the report states that the UK military advisor present in India during 18 to 17 February 1984 advised the Indian government that, and I quote directly, this type of operation should only be put into effect as a last resort when all other courses of negotiation had failed. But can the Foreign Secretary set out, based on the documents he has seen, but for understandable reasons may not be able to publish, what type of operation was being referred to in this case? The report also sets out, that again I quote directly, a quick analysis by current UK military staff confirms that there were differences between the June operation and the advice from the UK military officer in February. Can the Foreign Secretary explain the nature of this quick analysis undertaken on such a central part of the investigation? And does the Foreign Secretary expect a fuller review of this aspect of the evidence to be conducted? The report touches on the allegations that the potential sale of Westland helicopters was linked to the provision of military advice. It claims no evidence was found to substantiate this allegation, but none of the annexed documentation so far released pertains to this issue. The report cites, and I quote directly, ongoing contacts between UK and Indian officials around the time of Operation Blue Star on potential defence-related sales. So will the Foreign Secretary now commit to publishing this correspondence? Indeed, the Foreign Secretary spoke just a few moments ago of the exchange of correspondence between Prime Minister Gandhi and Prime Minister Thatcher, and yet only Prime Minister Gandhi's letter appears to have been published today, will he undertake now to publish the response of Prime Minister Thatcher? Mr. Speaker, everyone in this House is aware of the continuing pain felt by the Sikh community around the world at the events of 1984, not just at the storming of the Golden Temple in Amritsar and the deaths and destruction that followed, but also the anti-Sikh violence following the assassination of Prime Minister Gandhi and the emergency period which saw arbitrary arrests, accusations of torture, rape and disappearances that are still unresolved today. While of course there are differences within the Sikh community itself on the issue of a separate Sikh state, there is unanimity in their horror at these events. For British Sikhs, there has been, over recent weeks, the additional burden of worry that their own government may have been involved in these actions. So the government has a responsibility, indeed a duty, to address those very widespread concerns and fears, and if they are able to provide answers to all of those concerns and questions, then we as the opposition will support them in that endeavour.
The Foreign Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for his questions, and he's right to draw attention to the efforts of several of our colleagues on these and other issues, always to find out the truth about events in the past as well as in our own times. And my honourable friend, the member for Wolverhampton South West, is another example of that. And he's quite right as well to refer to the anxiety about these events of many people expressed over recent weeks, and that's why we should do everything we possibly can to set out the truth of the matters as that can be discovered from documents and from discussions with officials, which I think is, taken what I said earlier as a whole, a reassuring story to the House and to the public and to the Sikh community. He asked about some specific questions on process, whether we would publish a list of officials. No, I don't think that would be the appropriate thing to do. I think it is important to protect the anonymity of some of the officials and military personnel involved. He asked whether ministers had been spoken to, and yes, the Cabinet Secretary's investigation included discussions with the senior ministers of the time. He asked about whether the terms of the inquiry changed. No, they didn't change, except to the Cabinet Secretary's work covered over the last few years, expanded to cover some additional concerns that had been raised during the last few weeks. And we may come to some of those in the questions later, Mr. Speaker, but the terms of the inquiry remained the same, and there isn't really any mystery about the dates that the Prime Minister at the beginning asked the Cabinet Secretary to investigate these specific events, the issue of whether there had been UK involvement in the specific events of the leading up to and during Operation Blue Star in June 1984. That's therefore the time frame from the start of what was happening at the location in question, December 1983, to the Indian operation in June 1984. But as the Right Honourable Gentleman can gather from my statement, the Cabinet Secretary is able to go beyond that to say that in these 23,000 documents, he has seen no evidence, there is no circumstantial evidence of British involvement in any subsequent military operation in the Punjab. And that has been one of the questions that has been raised. Could there have been? There were subsequent operations called Black Thunder 1 and 2 in later years. Could there have been British military involvement in those? And the answer from everything the Cabinet Secretary has seen, examining hundreds of files, 200 files, is the answer to that is no. The relevant documents here are being published, those that can be published, while upholding, as I say, principles on publication that all British governments have always observed. Those documents that relate specifically to Operation Blue Star are being published here. There will, of course, be the publication over the coming years of many more documents concerning British relations with India in this time. So I certainly would not want to suggest no more documents will be published that shed light on relations between Britain and India over through the 1980s. It's the law, as I understand how the 30-year rule is implemented, moving now to a 20-year rule. It's when it's 30 years from the file coming to an end, and that file contains documents from earlier years. So, of course, there will be subsequent documents to be published about this period, but the relevant files have all been searched. And the documents that shed light on Blue Star are these. He asked about the military quick analysis. I don't think the word quick should be used in some pejorative sense here. This has been quite a quick report. These concerns arose only a few weeks ago. Military experts have provided that analysis. But actually, even to a layman, it is clear that the military operation mounted was very, very different from any that is being discussed in these documents. And was entirely different, as I mentioned earlier, without the element of surprise, with no helicopter-borne forces. It was conducted by the Indian Army, not by paramilitary forces who were present in February when the UK military advisor was there. And so, even to the non-expert on these matters, the military operation is clearly very fundamentally different, the one that was mounted in June, from any that was being discussed in February 1984. And so, overall, I think this is the right degree of transparency, a strong degree of transparency, and a thorough and good job by the Cabinet Secretary. And I think we should be prepared to support it as such.